want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. My name is Fred Litwin.
Noted author Fred Litwin. And of course, Fred is also the author of I Was a Teenage JFK Conspiracy Freak, On the Trail of Delusion, and Oliver Stone's Film Flam, The Demagogue of Dealey Plaza.
Fred Litwin is here. He's a longtime author and certainly watcher of politics.
Joining us, Fred Litwin. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Hi, welcome to another edition of On the Trail of Delusion, my bi-weekly podcast where I try to separate the wheat from the chaff and actually give you something substantive on the JFK assassination rather than the conspiracy gruel you get all over the internet. So today I'm really quite happy to bring back Nick Nalli, Doctor Nick Nalli, a foremost scientist who has studied all aspects of the Kennedy assassination. But let me tell you about his bio. He's got a master's degree and a PhD in atmospheric and oceanic studies. His PhD was from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He worked for NOAA and the U.S. government, which studies oceans and climate. And now he's an atmospheric or imagery scientist at the Department of Defense. I mean, an incredible background. And so we're so lucky because the last time Nick was on the Trail of Delusion, it was a great show. I mean, it was just a fantastic show, and there's a lot more to talk about, and perhaps Nick will come back for a third time because the science of the JFK assassination is absolutely fascinating, and there's so much to it. And in fact, there'll be more and more in fact, I can't wait until Nick publishes his first book, and I'll be the first one to buy it, believe me. So Nick, welcome to On the Trail of Delusion.
Thank you, Fred, for having me back on this. I enjoy doing this type of thing when I get time to do it. Sometimes it's tough to find the time, but I very much enjoy talking about two things: the science in general, and then also this JFK assassination, which we're all fascinated by. So today, what I'm going to do is I have some prepared slides actually,
right?
And it's going to be, I think, because I want to get through two different things here, and to get into it a little bit of depth, and to do that, it's just easier to have the slides. So think of this as like being in a college class, and feel free to ask questions if you have any. The audience won't be able to do that, but you can.
So I hope I don't fall asleep like I used to in college.
No, this you won't, because you like this stuff. And so, by the way, well done on your debate there with Matt Crumpton. Yeah, that was very nice, and I see you had a lot of viewership on that. So that's really great. Okay, good. So just a quick, again, upfront disclaimer: any scientific results or conclusions, as well as any views or opinions expressed during the podcast, are those of myself, do not reflect the views of the U.S. federal government or DoD. So these are the topics that we're going to talk about. First being the DPD, the Dallas Police Department dictabelt recording. Is it acoustics evidence? And then the second is the Zapruder film. Does it suffer from alterations or illusions?
Okay.
So starting off with the dictabelt. So, and there's a lot of slides to get through here. Is it acoustic evidence? And I'm going to hat tip to Michael Odell, Dale Myers, Paul Hoke, and believe it or not, yes, Tink Thompson, because his book Last Second in Dallas contains information on this that was sort of an introduction to me when I read it. So him as well. Okay, so the birth of the acoustics evidence. So this is sort of just the introductory slide. This goes back to, and this information you can find in really nice detail on Dale Myers' site. He has a report that he published there, and he really goes into some nice detail on the history. Tink Thompson's book also has a bit of that, a little less detail, but it's there. So I'm going to just kind of highlight it. In the mid-70s, it was Gary Mack and Penn Jones who first made these unsubstantiated claims that the Dallas police radio recordings captured gunshots. And Gary Mack claimed over a period, not just one time as an one-off, but over a period of time, that there were 7 to 8 gunshots that he heard on the recordings. And that's quite an extraordinary claim, right? I mean, imagine being around this where you hear someone saying that there were tapes made of police in the motorcade from a motorcycle police officer, and they heard 7 to 8 shots on those tapes. Now, if that were the case, that would be hard evidence of a conspiracy. Of course, you'd have to analyze it and make sure. You'd want to get the tapes. And of course, that's exactly what happened. So the House Select Committee formed for a different reason, and formed mostly in response, I believe, to the Zapruder film. So Blakey met with JFK critics in DC, and Mary Farrell is the one who brought up the police tapes. This is both according to Dale Meyer's version and Tink Thompson's version. And that's what led to the multi-decadal boondoggle known as the Acoustics evidence. So this is going from the mid-70s till now. And again, so I'm going to try to distill that all down. So acoustics evidence just simply refers to an audio recording of a continuous Dallas Police Department FM radio transmission that came from a motorcycle that had its microphone stuck open on the channel 1. So there were 2 channels that the police used. This was on channel 1. So this next slide here. Channel 1 was used for ordinary radio communications used by the Dallas Police Department, not special events. This is day-to-day. They used channel 1. They recorded their communications in a transparent way to be transparent, to have full transparency. There's nothing clandestine going on. They're recording what they're doing. That was recorded on what's called a dictabelt, and that was basically a tape that used a stylus. So it wasn't like a magnetic tape. You can't think of it as like an 8-track tape for the older people or cassette tape. It was like a tape, but it used a stylus that recorded physically the sound. So right off the bat, that gives you a sense that, okay, it wasn't even a magnetic tape, which is already sort of like an old technology, magnetic tapes. This is like even older. So it's kind of a primitive recording medium, but all they were trying to do is record the voice, the words that the police were saying to one another. That was the important thing. They weren't trying to, they weren't looking for high quality, hi-fi recordings. They're just looking for the words. So there's a second channel they use. So channel 1, channel 2, that was used for special events. And I cannot think of any more special an event than a presidential motorcade. So the police officers, indeed, were using in the motorcade channel 2 to broadcast. And those communications were also recorded, but they were recorded on a different type of piece of equipment, which is interesting, but it might be due to, funding or whatever at the time, but they used a gray autograph. And I believe that was an older technology, I think. Don't quote me on that. So the autograph was basically like a record player. It had a disc, and it had a stylus. The only difference between that and a regular record player is that as the needle moved inward, it sped up. And the reason for that was to keep a linear, because as you get toward the center, there's less, even though the angular motion is the same, the linear motion slows down because you have less distance to cover. So it speeds up as it moves in. Interpretation of the recordings is also complicated by these other issues. By the way, all this is stuff that I had learned pretty well from Michael Odell, and he's the one who really kind of become a master of all this. So it'd be good to have him on at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because he really figured all this stuff out. So to conserve the recording media, both these devices had an automatic sound activation. So they switched off when there's nobody talking. Makes sense. That's actually that's being economical. But that complicates things, right? So during times where nobody's talking, there's no recording, and so that makes it difficult to keep time on the tapes. Again, for day-to-day recordings, it's perfectly fine. But when you're trying to do this sort of forensic stuff, it becomes more difficult, and you have to count for it. They also had an automatic gain control feature, AGC. And what that does is it's dampening out loud noises and elevating soft noises. So what it's trying to do is try to keep a constant sort of amplitude or volume throughout. And the reason, again, is all they're caring about is words. So if there's loud noises like recycles, that can be suppressed down a little bit. Or if they're talking softly or they don't have the microphone up close enough to their mouth, then it gets elevated so you can hear them. So that's the automatic gain control. And then finally, the gray autograph was prone to skipping. Let me switch this to, here we go. I'm going to go to the laser pointer. There we go. So the gray autograph also had an additional problem. So there's dictabelt autograph. The autograph was prone to skipping, okay, because it's like a record player, and so it could skip, and that's another complication to deal with.
Right.
All right, so now I decided, this is decades and decades, and to try to keep it all straight, I decided to put it together as a saga in 3 episodes. And so the first episode, A New Hope, 1978 to 1982. So just having a little fun with this as well. So I already mentioned in the mid 70s, Gary Meck is the one who claims to hear gunshots on the radio recordings. Mary Farrell provides him with like a multi-dimensional copy or something to that effect, and he goes around telling people, I can hear multiple shots, 7 shots, 8 shots on these recordings. So then the House Subcommittee Assassinations is formed shortly afterwards, not in response to that, but Blakey meets with them in DC. Mary Farrell brings up the police tapes, and so they get the tapes. And I think they get kind of what's close to, the original copies of the tapes, maybe. And they perform their own investigations, including an acoustical experiment at Dealey Plaza. 1979, that's when the House Subcommittee releases this report, concludes a probable conspiracy, and it's based upon this acoustics evidence, and specifically this W&A report, which they said was a 95% confidence that there was a gunman on the grassy knoll. It was a couple of years after that, in 1982, there is a panel that's formed and releases a report. NRC is National Research Council of the Academy, National Academy, prestigious, very prestigious. They investigate the claims. Simultaneously, Steve Barber, a musician, discovers what's called a crosstalk, and we'll get into what that is, which suggests the time is off. NRC report ultimately disproves the acoustics and debunks it. And that's it, we would hope. That should have been it, the end. One movie, but no. About 20 years later, out of the blue, there's this 2001 paper that appears in a peer-reviewed journal by D.B. Thomas. And what happens in the paper is he claims to find an alternative crosstalk that changes things and puts things back, gets the timing, and it overrides the hold crosstalk that Steve Barber discovered. So what happens is then Michael Odell finds an error, but then Thomas conceives it and then says, well, there's another crosstalk. And so basically we've begun a new whole chapter, and that's why I've kind of broken it up. This all starts here. Dale Myers later goes on ABC National Television, also British BBC television as well, and basically shows that the open mic where the House Subcommittee determined that you had to have an open mic motorcycle at this location for these acoustics evidence to be correct. It wasn't located there. And then 2005, Linsker et al., that's the surviving panel members from the House Subcommittee, the Ramsey panel. They issue a full rebuttal of Thomas's 2001 paper and then also his Czech crosstalk. And then Thomas, though undaunted, according to Tank Thompson, that's his word, undaunted, in 2010 publishes a pro-conspiracy apologia entitled Hear No Evil, Politics, Science, the Forensic Evidence in the JFK Assassination, which is a weird title because science and politics have nothing to do with each other. All right, that's the whole purpose of science. Science it doesn't care about that stuff. It just is what it is. The world is what it is, and we're just trying to figure it out. The universe does not care about politics. Anyway, so I read that book. It has a lot of good information in it, but a lot of bad stuff as well. And it exaggerated the confidence of the grassy knoll shot to a ridiculous number, 99.999%. And then the final chapter now. So in 2010, by the way, the Return of the Jedi, the JFK empirically dedicated investigators.
Very good.
Yeah, I thought I'd have fun doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So in 2007 and 2010, Dale Myers actually puts a report out on his website, his web blog, and it's over that period because he had different editions. But so it's the 2010 edition really is the one that, but it came out in 2007. But the 2010 edition includes a response to Thomas's book. But 2013 comes along and Larry Sabato commissions the Sonolysts to do their own independent analysis of the recordings. And they come to a conclusion that rejects the acoustics as well. They conclude that the open mic's not even in the motorcade. Now, again, I'm going to get into all this in more detail, but just sort of the overview. Thompson, so from 2013 about to 2021 about, Thompson is at meetings saying that he has a new book in the works. And Michael Adell is a consultant for that. He debunks things that are going on, but he's ignored. And then in 2021, Thompson publishes Last Second in Dallas, the book. That is his sort of sequel. He has a revised reconstruction in there, and we'll get into that in more detail. All right, so now we're going to go kind of back and be a little more detailed on what we just talked about. So House Select Committee in the late 70s, they were able to get original tapes from the Dallas police, and imagine their disappointment. But, at the same time, I might not have been surprised. They listened to them and there's no gunfire on them. They don't hear anything resembling gunfire whatsoever. Despite that, the House Select Committee still decided that they would submit these to acoustical engineers for analysis. That's reasonable. And they got the tapes and they probably wanted to just make sure. And they figured we'll give them to experts and just to make sure that there's nothing on there. So that included James Barger, who was with Bolt, Baranek, and Newman, BBN. And then Professor Mark Weiss and Ernest Ashkenazi, WNA at the City University of New York. These were sort of acoustical experts. So it was Barger who first looked at the stuff. They did it not simultaneously. They first went Barger and then Weiss and Ashkenazi. An acoustical experiment was set up by Barger, where they went to Dealey Plaza and they set up a bunch of microphones in an array, and then they had live gunfire. I think they were using the weapon, the Carcano, from the Texas School Book Depository and the Grassy Knoll, those two locations. So they fired off test shots. They had their microphone array, and they were looking to see if they could discover patterns that would resemble the waveforms that were on the dictabelt. So they did that, and then that was handed on to Weiss and Ashkenazi, who performed an additional analysis. And it was based upon that acoustics evidence that the House Select Committee made their change from a lone gunman to probable conspiracy. So this kind of, I guess I really talked about all this right here. That in a way, I guess I didn't need this slide. So other than what they did is they found matches between the waveform impulses in the dictabelt with the test muzzle blasts and the echoes in Dealey Plaza. This shows a diagram from the report that kind of shows what we're getting at. So they had buildings in Dealey Plaza there, and they were able to come up with different trajectories of sounds as they would echo off of buildings and from the muzzle blast and such. And they were looking for those sounds to see if they correlated with the impulses on the dictabelt. When they did that, they came up with a 50% confidence of a waveform match with the shot that came from the Grassy Knoll. So 50% is half and half. So, it's like a random thing. So it's not a very good assessment. So what happens is then they handed the House Select Committee, went to Weiss and Ashkenazi to take a look. And what they did is they took the data from Barger and they used a hard copy map and basically paper and pencil analysis to see what they could come up with. And they came up with, using their methods, a 95% confidence of a gunshot from the Grassy Knoll, assuming that this specific, that there was a motorcycle located at the specific location. And the only motorcycle that they could come up with that was reasonably could have been was this HB McLean. So it ended up becoming, well, it's going to be police officer H.B. McLean. He has to be here. And if he's there, then we get a waveform match. By the way, when we talk about the waveforms, that's what this is. And this is from Weiss and Ashkenazi's report. So this is in time, I believe. And so sound is pressure waves through the atmosphere. They're compressive waves coming at you. So what it means is that you'll get momentary high pressure and low pressure coming at you. So what these sort of waveforms are showing is they're showing periods of high pressure and low pressure from sound waves. And a lot of what you see here is what we might call static or random, basically. There's not much signal there. There's just a lot of what's, noise or static. But you'll see some places that are spikes that might look like they're something that's outside of a white noise. And definitely here. And so that's where they said the suspect impulses are. Now, mind you, if you look at the whole set of waveforms, you'll find things like this everywhere, right? So it's not anything unique here. But these were the waveforms that they're trying to match, is these here. One thing that we're going to point out is because of this automatic gain control that was on the recording, the recording itself is never going to have anything that's really large. And that's the reason why you wouldn't expect that. Well, that was the reason that they hypothesized that we're not hearing the gunshots, is for that reason. But although even then, one of the police officers said, I believe, or someone said that, yeah, you can still hear gunshots in these things. So that's ridiculous. So anyway, we're going to go on. Okay, so this is the, quote, first debunking of the acoustic evidence. It was formally done by the NRC Ramsey panel. So they're the ones who were put together as a result of this Richard Sprague. I believe this Richard Sprague was the one who said you can hear gunshots, I think, on tapes like this, or someone of that nature. So he knew that there was a problem because he knew from the photographic evidence that he didn't think there's going to be a motorcycle in that location. So this is the problem when you rush to judgment, to borrow that phrase, as the House Select Committee did. So, they kind of rushed this and they didn't really establish things. And you have to establish things. They never established that there was a police officer there. They just kind of said, well, yeah, he probably could have been there, this H.B. McLean, and they let it go at that. And this gets you in trouble when you do things like this. So this Richard Sprague knew, no, I don't think there's anybody there. So he didn't keep his mouth shut. And he went to the Justice Department and told them about it. And then, they became convinced there's a problem. So that's what led to this NRC panel being formed. And that included Nobel Prize-winning physicist Norman Ramsey and Luis Alvarez, the hated Luis Alvarez. He was also on that panel. And they immediately found problems. But simultaneously, in the meantime, around the same time, they had put out these dictabelt recordings on floppy vinyl discs.
That was in Gallery Magazine.
Gallery Magazine. Now, is that like a Gallery Magazine? What kind of magazine is that?
It was a soft porn magazine, like
Okay.
House or Playboy.
That's what I thought. Yeah, good. Thank you for that. So yeah, so Steve Barber and Todd Vaughn, they were JFK.
They bought the magazine for the record, right?
Yes.
They're buying Playboy for the interviews.
They bought that's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. So they're JFK buffs, and but Steve Barber was a musician, and amazing. This is just really these stories are, I tell you, you can't make them up. So Steve Barber listens to this, and he notices something that nobody else notices. That's this thing called a crosstalk, where he notices that there's someone's voice appears on this channel 1 open mic. And he's like, wait a minute, that voice I heard on the channel 2. And it turns out that's what the crosstalk. So you envision this motorcycle officer has an open mic, but the motorcade is still broadcasting in channel 2. And so someone else's channel 2 broadcast got picked up by his open mic, and that's the crosstalk. Now, the reason why that becomes something is because then you can use the channel 2 to help time things in the channel 1, because channel 1 is just open the whole time. And so there's no other broadcast. There's no time markers in there, where Channel 2 had time markers, specifically things like the specific crosstalk was this Bill Decker, a sheriff. He's saying, hold everything secure until homicide investigators get there. And we know that that happened about 1 minute after the shooting. Of course, we know it's going to happen after the shooting, but it took about a minute before you had police officers saying this stuff because they didn't know even what was going on. And so that's what, when I call it the hold crosstalk, it's just because it's what's being spoken. So that was on channel 2. It got picked up on channel 1, and it's happening at the same time that the supposed gunshots are happening, right? So that's sort of a debunk right then and there. And so Barber notifies the NRC panel of the finding, and they they had found other problems themselves, but they affirmed that that's the case. So the suspect impulses occurred about 1 minute after the shooting, and basically all they do is they make sure that it's true, right? That they go through their own rigor to make sure that it's not that the claims here are correct. And so that was it. That should have been the end of it. And it was, for all intents and purposes, for 20 years. But then, again, as I said, out of the blue, this paper appears in 2001 by an entomologist at USDA, that's the United States Department of Agriculture. He claims in this paper that there's another crosstalk, and this one was spoken by this officer, Samuel Bella, and that crosstalk trumps the whole crosstalk, and that, yes, it's the grassy knoll gunman because it restored the timing. The paper receives mainstream media attention because that's an extraordinary claim. I mean, it's huge if that's the case. It's basically saying there's a grassy knoll gunman. So that became out in the open right away, and of course people hear about it. So Ting Thompson heard about it, and Michael Odell, this person who up to that point would have been what you call an unknown, and he was not a JFK buff. I talked to him. He wasn't a JFK buff. He was just a computer scientist, and he liked this type of stuff, and he was quite like, whoa, interesting. So this could it be that someone really scientifically proved that there's a grassy knoll gunman? So he just looked into it, but within, I don't know, maybe a couple months, he can confirm for you. I mean, short order, he found out the problem. And by the way, this problem is not necessarily Don Thomas's fault, right? So what happened is there were skips in the Channel 2 autograph recording that weren't accounted for. They weren't even accounted for by the NRC. They didn't account for these things. And so what happened is the omission of the time due to these skips, they invalidated Thomas's conclusion, but they did not invalidate the NRC conclusion. The impulses were too late, 30 seconds too late still. And Don Thomas acknowledged this. So when Michael Odell got a hold of Don Thomas to tell him about this, Thomas acknowledged it. And he acknowledged it actually at a JFK meeting too, that his objections were overruled, and that was it. And the thing is there was nothing wrong with that, and it wasn't really it doesn't really reflect bad on Thomas. It wasn't an error due to himself. It was just something that nobody had caught. Odell was the one who caught it. Again, that should have been the end of it. So the Ramsey panel survivors published a rebuttal paper, and that debunked it, and that should have been the end of it. Now, this is a little side note here. So independently, and this is stuff that, again, Michael Odell can get into with you if you want. He independently went back and debunked the Weiss and Eskenazi report. So and this is, I think I think Odell's paper on this is online. I think you can find it at the McAdams website. He has it out there, where what he did is he tried to reproduce their results and was unable to do so. And he concluded the following: this attempt to reproduce that experiment has demonstrated significant errors in WA's results at every step. Falsifying their report, that's what he did. He falsified their report. Basically puts us back to where things were before the House Select Committee and hired them to do the analysis. He tried to contact all of them, but they all declined the comment. Now, usually when you have someone declining to comment, it usually means that it's sort of like a tacit admission. And it's also like sort of like in a little bit, maybe you're a little embarrassed by it. At least that's the way I take it. Definitely that's the case for Weiss and Eskenazi. To my knowledge, and Fred, you might even be able to confirm, I don't think they ever spoke up again about the acoustics. I think they kind of remained mum for the rest of their time. And Mark Weiss, he passed away in 2020, and his obituary is here. And you notice they feature in the obituary that he worked on the Watergate tapes, but when you go into the obituary, there's no mention of the acoustics, and so that's sort of more, I think, um, tacit acknowledgement that they knew that they had problems with what they did. It would have been better if they came out publicly and acknowledged it. That's what I think they should have done. But certainly better that they not go out and try to defend the indefensible. It just makes things much worse. Yeah. It just better if you feel like you can't admit you're wrong, then just keep quiet about it and let it go. All right, so now the Dale Myers and Sonalist reports. This is all really great stuff because it's all different. It's all independent lines of argument. So Dale Myers used an epipolar geometric analysis. That just means you use cameras from different angles and you're able to deduce three-dimensionality out of it. So he used the different films, put them all together, especially the Zapruder film, but also others. And he was able to determine exactly where H.B. McLean was. And that was, he was 175 feet from the House Subcommittee position that he needed to be 1.5 seconds before the shot. So 175 feet and 1.5 seconds. It's a little bit too fast, right? But bottom line is he wasn't there. And that invalidated the House Subcommittee conclusion. And again, this is all published in detail. Now, he went on ABC, talked about this in 2003, but he has a detailed report that you can find from his website that talks about all this. Independent of that, Larry Sabato in 2013 commissioned the Sonalist. Sonalists are sonar, short for sonar analysts. They're like an engineering and tech contractor, supports the military, especially, I think especially in the Navy for sonar, which is sound. They performed an independent analysis of the dictabelt. What they did is they looked at the channel 1 audio and they analyzed the motorcycle engine speed. And they were able to determine by the sound, and they knew what kind of motorcycle, they actually knew what kind of motorcycle it was. And they were able to deduce the engine speed was way too fast. It was like going like 30 or 40 miles an hour or something to that effect. It was not in the motorcade, basically. So not only was it not in the position that it was supposed to be, it just wasn't even in the motorcade, right? So, all right. So now that leads us to, in spite of all this, Tink Thompson still tried to resurrect the acoustics in his book. So as I mentioned, he worked on this book and he teased it at meetings, JFK meetings, about this book that he's going to come up, and that the book was Last Second in Dallas, and he comes up with a revised scenario from his earlier book, his book 6 Seconds in Dallas. This one here, he changes what happened, and he claims that there's a second shot to the head. So JFK is shot in the head from the grassy knoll at Z313, and then later he's shot in the head from behind, which is just doesn't take into account Occam's razor whatsoever. I mean, it's just a very convoluted, quiet way of trying to get somebody on the grassy knoll. It's the only way I can describe it. So he relies on Thomas's check crosstalk, which was debunked by Michael Odell in his book. So Tink came up with a couple of his own arguments. I'm not going to get into detail here. That's the type of thing that Michael Odell might want to talk about, maybe. But more formidably, Tink consulted with James Barger, the original expert that the House Subcommittee relied on, along with a junior engineer, and they wrote an appendix for Tink's book. And the appendix is looks pretty technical. It is technical, but Michael Odell already had known about all this stuff, and he knew there were problems there. he just kept mum about it. So that's something that he might want to talk about as well. Now, this is sort of an overview conclusion of everything I just talked about from a scientific perspective. So it's the acoustics non-evidence. There's nothing there. It was a motorcycle broadcasting on channel 1. It wasn't part of the motorcade, and it had its microphone stuck open. It did not record anything from the crime scene. There are 3 general categories of arguments that discredit it. I'm going to distill it down. One is timing issues. So this is the original one. This is the one that most everybody had been focused on. This started with the hold crosstalk that Steve Barber came up with that went into the Ramsey report. Basically, the suspect waveforms on the dictabelt happened 1 minute after the shooting, approximately. The open mic location assumptions. The open mic motorcycle was not in the location it needed to be. That's what Myers talked about. And not only that, but it wasn't even in the motorcade. It was someplace else. And that's what Sonolis came up with. And then finally, insufficient audio information content. What does that mean? It means that the dictabelt was a primitive recording media, and it did not contain information that could tell you that there were gunshots. That's the reason why we didn't hear the gunshots, is the waveforms themselves. One thing about a gunshot, it's loud. What does that mean? High amplitude. So if you were to look at a waveform that really captures that information, like what you're hearing, you'll see like a very large amplitude, and then it might come off, and then maybe there's shock wave or something like that. That's not there. And that's because they didn't record that information. They did not record that information. They could not record that information. Now, why is that such a big deal? It's because right from the start, before all this stuff, they should have known this. They should have realized that these recordings, we cannot definitively tell you that there's an acoustical signature that's associated with gunfire to the exclusion of other ambient sources. What are other ambient sources? Motorcycles, people yelling. Oh, also crosstalks. So the whole crosstalk discovered by Steve Barber, that itself from channel 2 is a non-ambient, is an ambient source of sound that is not a gunshot. Turns out Michael Dell's looked into that a little bit, and it can create impulses that look just like it. And so the suspect waveforms are most likely, I think, and this is what Michael Dell thinks, were due to the whole crosstalk itself. So the gunshots was just the crosstalk.
So when Weiss and Ashkenazi did their test of firing from the 6th floor window, what they claimed to have matched that waveform to the dictabelt. Where do they really go wrong in that and sort of that match?
I don't think that they went wrong there, because what they were trying to match were all the different sounds that came out of Dealey Plaza due to a gunshot from certain locations.
Right.
So from the Grassy Knoll and from the Texas School Book Depository. And so you got like a muzzle blast, a ballistic crack or shock wave, and then echoes from buildings. And so they were looking for matches between those types of sounds along against the waveforms that was on the dictabelt. So they in other words, they created those sounds, and then they recorded them from a microphone array, and then they were able to find for that one microphone near the intersection that there was a waveform match. But the thing is what does it mean? What does match mean, right? So this is where you have to get into kind of get into the weeds a little bit, which is not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, well, what does it mean that something is matched? And then not only that, but is that the only source that can create those waveforms? That's what this here is. And that's where the whole thing was sort of doomed, even if a lot of these other problems are going away, as I've mentioned. Even if the timing, even if there was no hold crosstalk, let's say there's no, maybe Dale Myers found that there was the police officer there. Even if all that were the case, in my opinion, is still a problem, because you haven't proven that the recording is a gunshot. It could be due to other things. And that's what Michael Odell had already shown. But but in theory, it could be. I mean, there's other sounds that can give rise to things. So that's the information content problem. It's what you can derive out of data. Certain data, data gives you information, and then it depends on how much information is in there, what kind of conclusions that you can make. And oftentimes, you don't have enough information, so you make assumptions that constrain things a little bit. In this case, the assumptions they made was that the dictabelt, number one, was a police officer in the motorcade. Number two, they were located at that location. And number three, that the dictabelt had gunshots on it. But we didn't even hear the gunshots, and there's no waveform that suggests that that's a gunshot, right? So those were the problems. They were fatal problems from the beginning, in my opinion. In my opinion, all they could have ever claimed, if everything else were to go away, all they could have ever claimed was, we did an analysis, and from our analysis, we cannot rule out the grassy knoll as a location. We did an analysis, and we got a waveform match from a grassy knoll shooter, a waveform match, as I mentioned. So we can't rule it out, but we don't know if it was a gunshot or not. That's it.
Okay.
All right, so let's, and that's what I just said here. So yeah, so this just, I forgot what I even had in these slides. That's kind of what these are showing that I was just talking about. So this is what a grassy knoll test shot looks like. This has got the amplitude information in there. See how you got this loud sound? This is the muzzle blast, and you might have a shock wave after that, and then it kind of goes off into this tiny little area here. See? But then this is what the dictabelt had, right? There's a big difference between these. And what they did is they just assumed that, well, that's because there was this automatic gain, this got truncated, and that's an assumption though. That assumption, you can't make that assumption unless you have very good proof to do so. So that's where their mistake was. And by the way, this is Michael Odell doing his own waveforms where he just made a K sound. I guess he went, and that's what it produces. So a K sound can make impulse matches, basically is what he's trying to get at. And that's what the hold was, right? So the hold crosstalk was very likely causing this. Anyway, again, he can get into much more detail about that. All right, so I think if you don't have any other questions about acoustics, we can go on to the Zapruder film.
No, I just one question, or a very quick question about Ting Thompson. I mean, what fooled him, or he overrides all of this and accepts the acoustics evidence, and so how did he fool himself?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a great way of putting it, because I think that is the best way of putting it is he's fooling himself. And I think Richard Feynman had some sort of quote about, be careful about fooling yourself because you're the easiest person to fool. I think that he probably was looking for vindication of his earlier work, which was perfectly fine. I mean, again, he had a wrong conclusion, but otherwise was a contributor to the knowledge base. And I think he was just looking for validation of that for whatever reason. I don't know if it's ego or if he wants it to be. And it's this Don Thomas provided part of that. So I know that those two, because I've heard about this. I wasn't at these meetings, but I heard that the two of them kind of collaborated quite a bit. And so he's one of the ones who provided him that. And then there was other people at these meetings that provided other things that he just kind of took and ran with. One of them being David Wimp, who is the one who first put the idea in his head about the blur illusion, which we can get to. And then there was another person too at one of these meetings that talked about the second shot to the head. Oh, if you notice later in your own data, there's a motion that's forward, and that was more than the head snap. And so, yeah, he was shot in the head, again, twice. And no, it's not what's in the data. It's not there. So it's too bad that Thompson did that. I think his last second in Dallas could have been it's like I say, it was a missed opportunity to me. He could have come out and he could have corrected things from his first book in a proper way, and instead he didn't. He sort of doubled down and made it worse
Yeah.
than his original book. But other than that, it's a interesting book. You can read it. He talks about he does a lot of biographical talking in the book about what he did, during that time period, during the exciting time period with his Life magazine, and he got his hands on the Zapruder film. He looked at stuff, and so you can kind of get a sense of being that person and being sort of in that moment and being excited by it. And it was like a big part of his life, and so you can read the book and enjoy it for that reason, but not for his conclusions though. All right, so we'll go on now. This is a good segue. So Zapruder film doesn't suffer from alterations or illusions. This is hat tip to Roland Zavada. He's a Kodak film expert. Francis Corbett, was the principal scientist at the iTech Corporation. Max Holland, Paul Hoek in the sixth floor museum at Dealey Plaza. Particularly Max in the sixth floor for giving me a couple frames from the Zapruder film. Okay, so just background again on what the film is. It's forensic photographic evidence, and so I love photographic as physical because it's tangible, but also it records physicality. Remote sensing is what it is. It's the process of deriving information from EM radiation, and photogrammetry is a subdiscipline of remote sensing. And so it involves the measurement of photographic images. It's applied in numerous fields of study, including forensic science, obviously, but others as well. Just a quick overview of the Zapruder camera. So it was a Bell & Howell Zoomatic. Had a shutter speed of about 55 milliseconds per frame. And then exposure time of 25 milliseconds. So what happens is the shutter opens for 25 milliseconds and then it closes. And then it's closed for about half of the time. So you got to keep this stuff all in mind. So it opens, captures an image, closes, and then for about 25 milliseconds or 30 milliseconds, it's closed. Things are going on and it's not doing anything. Then it opens again. He used smartly Kodachrome 2 outdoor reversal film. It was not high speed. It would mean, and we'll get into what that means. It was optimized for bright lighting conditions, which is what we had on November 22nd. Okay, so there's this thing that's going on. There's this thing called Zapruder film denialism, was what I'm going to call it. And it's one of these, again, these things that you can't make some of this stuff up. So ad hoc assumptions, we know what those are, and conspiracy theorists using them in droves. So if there's something you don't like, just come up with, well, that an ad hoc assumption. And you just keep doing it. And so what they've done is they've built so many ad hoc assumptions that come around. The universe is sort of circular. It's a curved universe due to relativity, I guess, maybe, or something. It's come right back around. And now the Zapruder film, which was the whole impetus for the first generation Warren Commission critics, including Tink Thompson, they relied on it for criticizing the Warren Commission report for the single bullet theory, the back end to the left, and that's why the House Select Committee was formed, was because of it. But now we've had so many of these ad hoc hypotheses that now, ironically, you got a lot of people out there, a lot of them. It's not even fringe by the fringe standards. It's, it's almost become a mainstream thing. And now Tink Thompson is becoming the one who's sort of being forgotten about. They deny it's authentic. They think that it was tampered with and altered. And then if they don't do that, that's alterationist. If they're not doing that, then you have others who just deny things. Like, so for example, you watch it in full speed, and JFK and Connolly, they react at the same time. You can see it. I mean, it's so obvious when you watch it. People deny that. They say, no, they're not reacting at the same time.
I think they are. I do think this is one of the faults of the Warren Commission, that the Warren Commission didn't really adequately examine or discuss the Zapruder film. They missed the lapel flip. They missed the fact that they reacted at the same time.
You're right about that. Yeah, they didn't do that, did they now? Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's a fact. And another thing is there's the head snap, which we'll get into, but that's being denied, right? So there are two different lines of reasoning for denying it. One is the Tink Thompson, it's a blur illusion, due to motion blurring, and then the other is a lot of people are saying this too, but I'm not going to get into it too much. Is that it was due to the limousine braking. We're going to get into both of these. But first, before we do that, is it authentic? Yes, it is. First of all, how do you determine it's authentic? Well, one of the things is you do have to rely on expert testimony because most everybody out there, even I'm not an expert when it comes to the Kodachrome Kodak film. I know a lot about it. I'm an imaging scientist. I know a lot about how this stuff works, but I don't know the details on that film. So you have to go to the experts, first of all. And so Roland Zavada has said that there's no detectable evidence of manipulation image alteration on the Zapruder in-camera original film. And all supporting evidence precludes any forgery thereof. So this is what he said. Because he was paid, by the way, to take a look at it and found nothing. He found all the markings were there. It was this Kodak's film produced at that time period, I think 1962 or 1963, and it's authentic. Also, there's an ironclad of custody. Now, this David Rohn, he's not a lone gunman guy. Read his book. He talks about the chain of custody. There was no chance for conspirators to do anything with it. They never got a chance. And then Zapruder himself testified that they are authentic in camera, original and first generation copies. Another thing is that coherent alteration. As I say, coherent, meaning, yeah, you can go in and screw it up. You can go in there and take the film and ruin it, basically. I mean, it was 8 mm, and Kennedy's head on that fatal shot was tiny. You can go in there and try to mess it up, but if you're going to try to do something that's coherent through a film to meet some sort of preconceived notion about what happened before it happened or after or before you know what happened, I mean, it's not possible. It was not possible in 1963 and not even trivial today. And by the way, it was a reversal film, meaning that there was no negative. The film actually got produced as was. There's not a film negative. Now, what happens in the real world? Let's say in the real world there was a conspiracy and they did this cockamamie thing. They shoot him in broad daylight. What they would have done is they would have sent the Gestapo in, get everybody's camera films, and because it would take a Gestapo to do this basically, and then destroy them. They wouldn't have come up with this thing about trying to, alter it. And then finally, this is me, a philosophical question. If the Zapruder film could be altered and was, then how do we know the assassination even happened? Now you could say, well, Vincent Bugliosi doesn't think it was needed to determine what happened, right? Well, that's true. We didn't need the film to know that it happened, but that isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about once you go in that rabbit hole of denying evidence that you don't like, then you can deny all of it. You can deny everything. In fact, they deny the autopsy. They deny a lot of things. So you can deny everything. You can deny the fact that you could say that the media was in on it. You could say that that they set it up, that it was a contrived thing that happened. You can come up with all these ad hoc hypotheses. That the whole thing was contrived because Kennedy just wanted to get out. He didn't want to. He wanted a nice soft exit from the presidency, and he ended up going to Aruba or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's the only play left to conspiracy theorists because the evidence points to Oswald. So okay, we have to claim that's planted and altered and faked.
That's the point. And once you go down that rabbit hole, you can just do it everywhere, and you go no, and then you're just spinning your wheels, and you've got nothing. And that's so. That's just my philosophical question about it. So yes, the Zapruder film is authentic. Sadly, it shows the president being shot in the head, graphically and gruesomely. All right, so this is the materials here that we're going to be looking at. Everybody knows this, so it's Zapruder Frame 312 and 313. I rendered them in grayscale. Notice I put a scale on here. I put that on there because it's cool. I'm trying to show this is a quantitative endeavor. What I've done is this image is a matrix of numbers. And the numbers I've got grayscaled according to this scale here. But so what I've got is a matrix of numbers here and here as well. It's frame 313 that we have this what is claimed to be the camera, the panning error due to the fact that what's happened is the limousine's got a little in front of the camera. Now, so you got both of them. By the way, this woman is a little bit blurred here because she's moving, but you notice she's a lot more blurred here. That's again. So what's happened is it's a lot like the Lee Harvey Oswald shots. What's happened is because the limousine is orthogonal, the amount of tracking, the angular tracking is at the maximum point. So it turns out it's right here at this fatal moment that it was the most difficult to do the filming because the limousine has to take the most panning. And then not only that, but it's on a downslope. So if you notice, Zapruder had trouble keeping the limousine centered, right? I mean, this frame here is mostly all wasted on the lawn. And we barely got him down here. If he were centering it, JFK would have been more up here. So that's all just matters of fact. So what's happened here, by the way, this is not due to the gunshot. This is not a startle error, which would be kind of more erratic. This is just the limousine got a little bit ahead of him. He had a little difficulty tracking it because this moment happened before he would have even heard the sound, I believe. Certainly before he would have reacted. Maybe he would have heard the sound, but he wouldn't have reacted that fast. And one other thing too, this is how you know it's tracking error also is because the sun glint here off the chrome is horizontal. It's maybe 1 degree off of horizontal, but it's a totally horizontal thing. So it just has to do with the limousine got a little ahead of him as he was trying to pan along, and it got difficult. All right, so this shows them in the typical fashion, the repeating animated GIF file. And you see a lot of these all over the place on the internet. They're in full color. It's very gory. It's another reason why I rendered it in grayscale, by the way. I mean, one is because we're just doing some photogrammetry here, but another thing is because, it's just very gory. So, you don't need the gore to do the analysis. Anyway, you can see between the two frames that he has a forward head snap. It's clear as day, and it was measured by Tink Thompson to be about 5 centimeters. You'll notice, though, that the second frame blurs, and you can kind of see that, especially here. You can also see it in John Connolly's head. You can just kind of see it in other places. That's where the blur illusion comes in. But however, before we get to that, I want to point out it's not due to limo braking, because to get into physics again, classical mechanics, what we're talking about here is something called a fictitious force that happens from a decelerating frame of reference. Newton's laws apply in an inertial frame, meaning that Newton's laws hold in the frame, basically. That's what the inertial frame is. So whenever you got a reference frame that's accelerating and decelerating, it's not inertial anymore. And what happens is fictitious forces can arise. Now, you can get rid of the fictitious forces by using, let's say, we use the street pavement as our inertial frame. Then what happens is it's no longer fictitious forces. But what happens is in this analysis is more convenient to use the limousine as the frame of reference, in which case then you end up with fictitious forces if it slows. A fictitious force, though, due to this in a decelerating reference frame means that everybody in the reference frame, all the objects will behave in the same way. And what that means is that their center masses all react in the same way. So you got a center of mass in your head and one in your body. And what happens is it would both snap. And not only that, but everybody in the limo would snap that way as well. Because There's a lot of time that went through between these two frames, 50 milliseconds. That's a lot of time if you're talking about, narrowing down your scale, your time scale. If you have like a high-speed camera, there's a lot that can go on between those two, that 50 milliseconds. So there's a lot of time between there. And so if you're going to say that this is due to limo braking, then everything else in there is going to be you're going to have the same thing happening. Now, I'm really hammering this home. Maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but there are people who's claiming this is due to limo braking, and it's not. One other thing, too, it's 5 centimeters approximately in one frame. That implies deceleration of the car by 2 miles per hour per frame, or 40 miles per hour per second. So, hot damn, this limousine can do a braking. It's like going from 0 to 40 in 1 second. That's one sports car there. So in other words, like there's no braking that's going to cause that, is what I'm also trying to say. I mean, if there was a braking, it's not going to cause that much. All right. So anyway, I beat that too. I'm sorry about that, but I just feel like I have to hammer it home. So now what about the blur illusion? We could see that it becomes very blurry here. Is that, see Connolly's head kind of goes, oh. Is that what's happening here? So let's take a look. All right, so what is that? So it's an ad hoc hypothesis. The forward motion of that head is due to blurring. Extreme motion blurring can indeed cause distortion in film images. All right, so this is why, Paul Hoke, who's the one who said I should look into it. I didn't want to because I'm thinking it's not necessary, but he did point out, and these are, I believe these frames here from the Zapruder film, they're frames 405, 408, 409, 409. This is later in the film, a part of the film that most people don't care about. I believe Thompson includes these in his book to illustrate the point. And it was something that I had to think up a little bit about because I looked at it and, well, they do have a point here. And that is that, so what happened is after Kennedy was shot in the head, then Zapruder became quite unsteady. And it was no longer just panning error. He was just probably nervous as hell. And I'm surprised he didn't just drop the camera, which I probably would have done. So that led to this sort of extreme blurring. And if you notice, the lamppost here is distorted. And then there seems to be white bleeding in on it. And there's a person in back of it here. So don't worry about, so this guy here is back there. So that's what's going on there. But it's sort of like, looks like it's moved, right? So that's what the point was. And so what's interesting is this is a legitimate phenomenon. You can have blurring creating distortions. I don't want to call it an illusion, but distortions. But so the question is, that's what is that what was going on here? So to get to this, I got a hold of Roland Zavada and asked him about it. And fortunately, he provided me exactly what I was looking for. He provided me this Kodachrome movie film specs for that particular film. And it's this page here, the second page, that I was most interested in. It provided me something exactly what I was looking for, which is this curve here. Now we're going to go ahead and zoom in on that. That's what this is. So I took that and I zoomed in on it. And then what I did is I digitized it. Now, what is it? It is a plot of the density of the film versus the log exposure in lux seconds, which is intensity seconds. And what that means is intensity seconds just means that the shutter opens, the film is exposed to light coming in, and it's exposed over a period of time. And it's both the combination of the intensity of the light, how bright it is, along with how long it's sustained. So it's a combination of both. So if you have a light that comes on very bright and goes off before the shutter closes, then that will register as less bright than if a light is just on the whole time while the shutter's open. So that's what this is depicting. So what I did is I took this and I digitized it. So then I have my computer now. So I got numbers in my computer. Density means it's more opaque. So the film is more opaque at lower exposure. They have it in logarithmic here. I then took it to linear. And this way you can kind of see it becomes nonlinear. So it's a linear axis, but the curves are nonlinear. And so what's happening is it's saying that the film is opaque and it becomes less opaque as it's exposed longer, but it's sort of like starts very fast and it tapers off. that's what's called the non-high speed part of it, the outdoor part. It's trying to make sure that it doesn't saturate. The film is designed so you don't saturate. Then what I did is I took the grayscale. So I averaged, grayscale is just an average of those three colors here. And I took the negative. So now what happens is it's the opposite. So now as exposure goes up, it becomes higher numbers. And now I wanted to get rid of these numbers because these numbers don't really mean anything now. So I turned it into what's called brightness. It's a number from 0 to 1. So from lower exposure to higher exposure, you end up from numbers of 0 brightness. So now it's really making sense. 0 brightness means it's going to be black. And then we go up to white. All right. So, and it has to do with how long, again, the film is exposed. I won't go into all this in detail. We won't have time, but this is just my methodology. So what I did is I simulated the effect of the film response on motion blurring. And then I assessed whether motion blurring can create the illusion of isolated motion. Let's worry about this side more. So what I did is I took that response curve and I took it and I took the brightness array that came to me from the Zapruder film itself. I converted it back to exposure. And then I blurred the exposure by applying a boxcar filter, horizontal. So I blurred it. And then I took the exposure back to brightness. So what this is doing is it's simulating the effect of blurring according to a film that has an exposure curve that sort of is nonlinear, that it responds to the light in a nonlinear fashion. This is all to try to investigate the idea of, does this effect, which can cause distortion like lampposts against with extreme, the cameraman was extremely unsteady at that point, can that also cause the JFK effect? And this is the result. So the left side is Z312 and a blurred Z312. So 312 and blurred Z312. What we're looking for is, did it create a head snap? And the answer is no, it does not. You see a lot of the other stuff is very similar, right? You can see that the chrome here becomes distorted and you see his head, Connie's head does what it does, but everybody kind of blurs out and there's no isolated motion on his head. Conversely, or on the other hand, also, if we go over to the right, what I've got is the blurred 312 and Z313, which is already blurred. And now you notice this all looks quite the same. They're all blurred about the same way. The only difference is just that I only had a horizontal blur where Zapruder had a little bit off, about 1 degree off. So that's the only thing you can kind of notice here. Otherwise, that all looks fine. But then you go over to here and his head's still snapping forward. So there's no blur illusion, and that doesn't explain it. So blur or not, it's his head that's being hit. And bonus.
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. So I just thought I'd talk about this a little bit. So there's this thing on the internet that, his head is blacked out the back. So that's part of the alterationists. They went in there, they knew within hours that there had to be, he was shot in the head from the front, and there was a big blowout. We have to cover it up. So so this bottom line is this whole thing that I just talked about explains what's going on. What's happening is that there's a point in the curve where if you don't get enough exposure, you don't get enough intensity exposure, you'll end up with just a blackout, right? And that's what's happened here. So all that's happened here is his head's in the shadow, the sun's on that side, you're facing the sun, and his head's in shadow. And so it's too dark because it really is in shadow. And by the way, his back is also in shadow. It's blacked out too, but details. But that's what's going on. It's just that there's not been enough intensity seconds to cause a reaction, so it's blacked, right? And really, that's all it is. And this paper by Farid, he actually modeled it, and he showed the same thing. He used a 3D model to show that you get the same effect. And one other thing too is when it comes to photo fakery, it's nothing new there. I'm not saying it can't happen, that you can't do it, But this is also extremely difficult to fake, shadows. And then especially if it's a 8mm and his head is a tiny little part of the 8mm. It's very difficult to fake this type of thing. All right. So that's what the black patch is. It's simply the it's like today, you can even take your camera phone. If you take it out in the dark and you try to take a picture and there's no lighting, it comes out black. And this is sort of the same thing. The only difference here is you have a film response, whereas with cameras, you don't have to worry about film. All right, so conclusion. This forward head snap, again, I didn't discover it. All I did was analyze it. It was discovered by Rich Feynman, I believe, and it's exactly what it appears to be. It's not due to illusion. It's not due to limo braking. It's just a measured, isolated forward movement of JFK's head on the order of 5 centimeters between 2 frames. In accordance with the principles of classical dynamics, it could only originate from an impulse from a directional real force. Real force means not fictitious force, but a real force. His head suffers a fatal wound, so the force is due to a bullet impact. And that's only consistent with a impact that's going from back to front. So it's him being hit in the head, and that if you do an in-depth dynamical calculation, which is what I had done in a certain way using forces. I treated the skull and the soft tissue in certain ways. You end up with a movement on the same order of magnitude, about 5 centimeters. So what's observed agrees with what physics would predict. So the Zapruder film provides independent corroborative forensic evidence that JFK was shot in the head from the rear, and I believe that's all I have.
Well, that's a great presentation. I mean, I really, really appreciate that. That's fantastic. I mean, what again, going back to the Warren Commission, well, the first generation critics, I mean, it used to be the first generation critics would take all the evidence, the 26 volumes, the Zapruder film, whatever, CE 399, and they would argue the evidence. And the problem is now is that the new generation of critics do the opposite. We do not want to argue the evidence. We're going to tell you the evidence is phony, planted, fake, and whatever. That's the only. It's a whole new way of arguing, and it means you can't really discuss the assassination because they reject all the evidence. It's extremely frustrating.
You can't. It becomes impossible to discuss it at that point. It's the analogy I always like to use is that it's like talking about how many angels can dance in the head of a pin, and arguing with each other about that. You're going to get nowhere. And so as soon as people start denying it, then you can't go. I just say, well, how do you know that he was assassinated then? And then they think that's, I'm not, but you've gone down that path. And there are people, by the way, believe it or not, I come up with that crazy thing, but then there are some out there who think that is what happened, that he wasn't assassinated.
Yeah, or people saying Jackie shot him or whatever, really gets really
right.
hard.
Yeah. Mrs. Kennedy, with her poison dart gun.
Tink Thompson's not responding to any of the critiques of his book.
Yeah, I noticed that there was that interview recently that was circulated on the social media. And I listened to it, and he had a sympathetic interviewer who didn't bring anything up like that. No hard questions. The only hard questions were, what's the magnitude of the conspiracy that would have to go into doing all this? And he was very uncomfortable with those questions. I could see it, because he's not irrational, but he's irrational about this. Because I could see that he's thinking, oh my God, that's like fringe. I'd have to be saying that, everybody's in on it. Right, he doesn't want to go there. He just wants to say, well, no, all I proved is that he was shot by more than one gunman, and we're going to leave it go at that. But we're like, you can't just leave it go at that. I mean, you can't just say that and say, okay, well, I'm done. You have to, okay, what? Who was the gun? You go further than that. He doesn't want to do that. And it's too bad.
Well, look, this is all fascinating stuff, and there's still a lot more to discuss about the head wound and stuff, because you've written so much. And so obviously a third session is going to be upcoming in the near future. But thank you very much. It's been amazing.
Okay, great, Fred. And glad. I hope everybody's enjoys this who's watching it.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon for another edition of On the Trail of Delusion.